guys. So if you guys didn't know, today we're going to be doing some back-end development. This is our second part in our three-part series on web development. Our first part, we already went through just some of the basics. We went through the slideshow. I posted that on YouTube if you guys need to check that out, if you guys aren't caught up. And today we'll be doing some back-end development and showing you guys just how these concepts are really applied. Going through first, we're going to be going through Node.js, as well as Express, which is a framework, a library basically that allows you to do these HTTP calls and all this web stuff. And then we'll also show you Flask afterwards, which is basically Express but in Python. They're very, very similar syntaxes, and they're very similar in concept. So yeah, all right. I think at this point I think we can get started. Okay, so I'm going to present my screen to you guys just first. Yeah, I think this will be fine. The right screen. Okay. Okay, guys. So today we're just gonna be going over like a code along, I guess. Does that make sense? But I guess just to get you guys understanding kind of the first part, I'm gonna search up Node.js just on this, just to explain to you guys what the hell we're doing, because we're not using Python in this first part. We're using something called Node.js. So Node.js is an environment that allows you to run JavaScript code on a server. So for example, like I have Python here. I can open this up and then I can this is an area, this is like a program that lets me run any of my Python code, you know, and it does that. Node.js is similar as well. So if I just open Node.js, I could run Node.js code, and that's basically what it does. And we can put this on a server, and it will do stuff. So yeah, so just for like installing Node.js, it would be similar to you installing Python. You can also just use REPL as well. REPL has all these like pre-configured as well. But if you guys, I don't know if you guys went over this, but if you guys are on Windows with system commands and stuff, you need to have it in your environment variables. So as you can see, I have Python linked, I have Node.js linked, I have scripts linked. Like that's what you would need. But yeah. There's a bunch of tutorials for you guys to just know how to install this, but we're going to be using Node.js. It's running something called JavaScript, which is a programming language. JavaScript is actually runs on your web page, so whenever you inspect elements here, you can see a bunch of HTML code and stuff, but there's also going to be JavaScript running somewhere as well. So JavaScript is really the programming language that runs on your website, and also with Node.js you can run it on your server. So yeah, that's what we're going to be getting into first. So I also, with Node.js, you also get introduced to something called npm, which is installed with it. npm is basically a command line tool that allows you to install different things, different libraries. So it would just be just like Python. Python has something called pip as well. But if you want to download any libraries, we can use npm. So I already showed you like the environment variables, how like I can just run commands. You know, Node, I can just run commands here because I've linked it. And then I can also run npm as well because I've linked it as well. So npm, I'm going to use npm to install, or just to initialize a project. So I'm just going to npm initialize. I'm just going to go through these. And basically this makes a new node project. So it basically creates this thing called package.json. And what this file does is it basically contains all of the data, metadata of our project, as well as just data on like which libraries we've installed. So npm is just a good way for you to understand when you're making a project. Each project has different libraries, so then this really helps you differentiate them and organize them. So we're gonna install something, our first library, Express. So npm install Express, and then we're just gonna save it to our package.json so we can track that. And Express is a library. Oh, npm install Express. Refuse to install package name. Oh, I understand why this is happening. So unfortunately, Express. Okay. Okay. We're going to. The reason why I'm running into this issue is because this folder is called Express, and it shouldn't be like that. So I'm actually just gonna. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm actually just going to close that and rename that quickly. Okay, and then we're just going to open that folder again. Now that I've renamed it, so now we should be able to npm install Express. Save. Under a name, also called Express. Alright, I need to rename it again. It's still not letting me. But basically, we're just trying to install our library with npm. So I'm just going to make a new folder, and should be fine. And then we're just going to initialize npm again. As you can see, when I'm going through these steps, like I can add things like description, test commands, git repository, but that's not really important right now. All right, now that we're in, I'm going to npm, hopefully npm install Express. And it also added a package lock.json just showing that I've installed that. And you can see in dependencies it's installed Express 4.1.1, 17.1. So yeah, we've installed Express now. So now we can, in this project, we can use Express. So we're gonna add just a new file, just a new JavaScript file called index.js. This is gonna be a file where you can just do stuff. And I just want to show you that I'm just gonna write some code in here, basic code, console.log hello. So basically console.log is just print in JavaScript, and basically if in my command line I can use node./index.js, so I can basically node and then just run this command, and it works. It prints this to the console. It says hello. So just like kind of like Python. And then just in package.json, I'm just gonna add a script to this, just a handy dandy script called run. Not run. Start. And what this is going to do is it's going to run our command, the node /index.js. So just in a node in a node project, we can just do this. So then now I can just do npm run start, and it will run this command for me. Handy dandy. All right. So now let's get into actually talking about Express. I've showed you kind of basics about Node and kind of npm, but you should be doing some research by yourself. But yeah, let's get into Express. So first, Express, we actually need to import Express. So this is how you import libraries, and then we're going to make a variable called Express, not called called Express, which basically contains the library stuff. Variable called app, which is the initialization of our Express app. we're going to define a port to use. Basically, with any URL, you have a bunch of ports you can use. So you can have like port for an IP address. You can have multiple ports for multiple things. You can have like one on 3000, one on 3030. You know, just different ports. We're just going to do that. And what we want to do is our initialized express app, which is what we've done. We want to use. Oh, actually, never mind. I'll get to that later. But here with Express, we can basically just define routes of our API. So this is a basic get method. So app.get defines a get method route. So what we can do is the first parameter is just the route. So it's our IP address and then just a slash. So we can also define a function. I'll take in a request and the response. And what we can do is we can with the response we can send something. We can send some text maybe like get request to the client, and then we can also just console.log something as well, just to show you how it will log the console down here. Console.log get request success. All right. So here's just showing you guys how we can like define a method route, just something. But then we also need just to be able to actually just run the server as well. So we need to do that, app.listen, that's what it is. And first parameter is going to be whatever port we're using. And then what we'll be doing. So what we want to do afterwards once it's running. So I'll just copy and paste this. Console.log, so our app is going to be listening at localhost something. So localhost is basically the IP address that's accessible by like your own computer. It's basically running on your own computer. And this is basically what you would have when you're testing apps. So if I just npm run start, if I just run the server, I need to save this, npm run start, you can see that my app is listening at localhost 3000, right? So this code basically just initializes the server to just run, to just keep listening. And that's how really web servers work. They're constantly on and they keep just listening for requests if anything comes in. And then we're able to just define routes. So app.get slash, we could also do like /test. So it would be, when we're trying to call it, it would be localhost /test. And as you can see, actually, we need to do port 3000 /test. Oh, all right. So we're not going to use the web browser for that because there's some issues with security and stuff. So we'll use something else called Postman. I'm just going to use Postman for this, and it just allows me to send requests. So simple get request to localhost 3000. I'm just gonna go back to my file. Okay, so port 3000. I'm just gonna get rid of this for now, and I'm gonna run this. And it was a get request, and that's basically what I told it to return, get request. We could also, and then you can see in the console it says get request was a success. Also just write test funny, maybe some other text, send it. And every time we make changes to the server, we also have to restart it as well. Now there's some libraries and stuff where you can make it so where it auto refreshes, but just for now, just see, test funny. Haha. All right, and then that's just basically your simple get request, really. You can just do that to a server. All right, I'm gonna stop that instance, and I'm just gonna show you some more just stuff. So with our parameters and stuff, we can have this simple just slash. We can also do slash test as well. So then it has to be localhost 3000 slash test. And then just in our file, I'm just gonna run the server. So basically the request will only come through test. So slash test funny, but if we just do just localhost, there's an error because there's nothing defined there. But yeah, it's basically what it is. All right, so now we're gonna get into some ways we can add some data into our request. So I'm gonna differentiate something called request queries as well as URL parameters. So in our get, we can do something called. So I'm just gonna define it on a route slash queries, and what we can do is I'm going to console log the request.query. So what this does is I'm going to show you where the request queries are. So as you can see, we can add something called query parameters. So if I have a key test and then value 1, as you can see here in the URL, those are these are what you call query parameters. So after the question mark, it's test equals 1. Even in this Google Meet, there's PLI is equal to 1, and there's also auth user is equal to 1 for me, for example. And as you can see, it's just kind of like that. And we can actually send these. I'm gonna send this, and I need to run the server, make sure that I'm running it. So query parameters. Just gonna run that, and npm start. Okay, and then we're gonna send the request. It's obviously not updated, but as you can see though, the request is an object and it just has a bunch of like features and stuff, but it's if we look at query, as you can see, it returned log PLI is equal to 1, auth is equal to 1, and that's what we set in here. So those are request queries. Then I'll get into something called parameters as well. URL parameters. So I'm just going to do parameters. And what you can do is in your like URL, just like the slashes and stuff in the directories, you can have just something that's just a variable. So if I write it like this, parameters and then :p, this could actually be anything. It could be test, it could be just anything. I guess let's do test then for now. But what you can do is we can send a request to /parameters, and then we can type in anything afterwards. So like example, and I just need to make sure I'm running this or restarting the server once again because I've made changes. All right, and I misspelled this, parameters, URL parameters, yeah, and then I put in example, and then here it says what this parameter was, test is example. So that's just an example of URL parameters, how you can have just a directory, and then a part of the directory can just be anything the user says. We can also have just multiple of these, test and then example as well, like that, for example. And yeah, that's what URL parameters are. Now, finally, I'm going to get into post requests. If you guys didn't know what post requests and how get requests are different, get requests, you simply just get data and are mainly meant for that. on a post request, you'd also send something called a body, which has some sort of data. So the body could be some sort of file, like a JSON file or an XML file or any of the sorts. For my purposes, I'm going to be using a could be sending JSON files. So if you're going to be using JSON files, you need to actually specify as well at the top express.use app.use express.json. That's what I'm going to be doing. If you guys didn't know what a JSON is, it's kind of like a dictionary of sorts. So for example, I could just make a new file like JSON. So JSON is like a dictionary, so it has these curly braces and then has like keys. So test, bananas could be set to true, as a comma afterwards. What else? Name is equal to Carl, that type of thing. So that's what a JSON is. So that's what we're doing. We're gonna make app.post. So it's just like our app.get. And then we're going to do just some sort of directory. So we're just going to do the base directory, just // do a function, have the parameters, the request as well as the response. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, in the response, we're going to send it whatever is in the requests, like the body. So I'll show you that a little bit more in Postman, where you can see kind of the body. And then success. So I'm just going to run this, the server, and then I'm going to show you guys post. So this is a post request, and in a post request you can add something in the body. And what I've done is in the body is sending a JSON file, and this JSON file is test. The name is going to be test, and then excuses 1. That's what I have, for example. And then just like I showed you, these are all keys, and they all have values. And then if I just run this, it sends back whatever this is. So it just sends it back, and it shows you that it was a success. All right, I think that covers most of the basics of just web development for Express, and just showing you guys how how basically APIs are just a bunch of routes just to get requests and post requests and stuff. So I'll hand it off to Christian, who will, if you guys just were confused about JavaScript and stuff and how it worked, he'll show you it in Flask, and where you'll be more familiar with the Python syntax, will be a lot more clear for you if you missed out on some stuff. All right. Your mic is a little bit quiet currently. It's inaudible. Is that? Can you guys just type in the chat if it's good for you guys, if there's any issues with like his mic? I just need to check if. Yeah, I think it is your mic though a bit. Right? I'm not the one who's going crazy necessarily. All right. Yeah, but you guys were like basically unable to hear, right? Just type in the chat or unmute. I don't know. Right? I don't know. I've been talking for so long that I've kind of forgotten if I've kind of forgotten if my volume or my audio is even working. But yeah, You guys have been able to hear me, right?
Yup.
Testing, testing.
Yeah, it's a
Oh, is
lot
that
better. A lot better.
sweet, sweet. Sorry about that. Let me share my screen. There we go. Can you guys see them?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Awesome. Okay. So now that you learned about Express, I'll be introducing you all to a Python web framework known as Flask. So I'll just be stepping you through a simple bare bones web app I wrote, which can handle user logins and registration. And it also has a very simple API implemented, just like Kevin showed you. Um, yeah, before we get started, I'll just mention a few things. So I tried to make the code as simple as possible, so you can follow along or like fork this REPL and like make your own web app. I'll share the link with you afterwards. Like I'll put the REPL link in the CS Clip server, so you can like mess around with the code and whatnot. Yeah, so Flask specifically is great for hackathons and quick demos. You can get a server started really quickly. As you'll see, it's pretty simple, which leaves you more time to handle other parts of your project. That's why I picked it up. I've always been like the backend guy at hackathons, so um, yeah, I pretty much have always used Flask for our projects. And yeah, I guess I don't think I have anything else to say before we get started. So before we actually dive into the code, let's take a look at the actual website. So as you can see, it's quite bare bones, but it's the functionality we're testing here. So click login, and it's pretty simple HTML. It just takes you to a login page, and I'll just make up some account for now. So uh, I'll just say biscuit with the password 1234, and we'll make an account. And then oh, that's not good. Whatever. So yeah, you can see when we sign in, it says welcome back and the username, so it's like dynamically generated. And obviously, if I open this in like a separate page, it says the same thing. So like it's actually like using cookies, which I'll show you later. And then you can log out, and then takes you back to the main page. And then of course, if I try signing in with a different password, it doesn't let you sign in. Cool. Let's see how I wrote this code. So the first thing in your Flask web app is obviously to import Flask. So from Flask, we want to import Flask with a capital F, which is like the actual server class. Then there's like a bunch of other functions. Actually, I'll talk about those as we run into them. So then similar to Express, you may have like an app variable. And in Python, it's a little bit different. When you actually instantiate the Flask class, you also have to add in this underscore underscore name underscore underscore. Yeah, I won't get into that in the sake of time, but it's just like a thing Flask requires. And then you can also set the secret key for your Flask server. This is just like 16 random bytes. Yeah, it's used by the session. I'll talk about that later on, but yeah, it's a good idea to like keep this secret and don't share it to anyone, because if you do, people can like modify their session and it's like and bad things happen. And then yeah, this is just like a dictionary. Again, there's like a bug here. I'll talk about that later. There's actually a bunch of stuff to go through. Okay, so I guess the first thing we'll look at is this app.route thingy here. So in order to specify a route in Flask, it's quite similar to um, Express in that you just like basically put the URL in. So in this case, I want this function to be executed whenever a user accesses the root directory of the website. So I just use the decorator app.route, and I put in just the slash here for the root directory. And then whenever somebody accesses the main directory, it will run this function. But what does this function do? So it returns a render template with base.html. Now, render template is basically a convenience function provided by Flask. Um, you don't actually have to use it. You can technically just like put anything you want here. Like instead of doing this, I could like return like, you know, like any HTML code I wanted to. You could do like hello world. Just, I guess it's not really HTML, but you could put any code in here. And when the user runs it, this will show up on their screen. So it's really convenient in that way that it's almost simpler than Express. You literally just return whatever you want the user to see.
I'll add in when he's returning when he's doing a render template. This is an example of, if you guys knew in the last, this is an example of a like dynamic website that's just like run off of the server, if that makes sense. And we use something called a template to be able
Templating
to
language.
in order to inject just data into that HTML template. So this is one of the ways, and one of the more old school ways of making websites. Nowadays, you're able to um, get away with some other stuff, which we'll explain at some later date. But yeah, this is just an example of like PHP kind of days. More old school websites.
In my defense, you guys, we haven't done HTML, CSS yet, so the front end is a little bit bare bones. But again, most of the like what I wanted to teach you guys is just about like the routes and some of the other stuff. But yeah, the render template does support something called Jinja, which is a templating language. I'll show this later on, but it like you saw when I logged in how it showed my username in the top. That was enabled through this language. But yeah, I'll show you guys that later. But in this case, when there's like no fancy arguments, literally all this function is doing is reading this file, which is, by the way, yeah, it searches for these files under the templates folder. It's like you have to make a folder called templates and then put all your HTML in there. And it literally just reads the file and then sends it to the user. So like, yeah, you could just read it and then like read all the data and send it to the user as well. You don't have to use this function in this case, but it's convenient if you're using templates. Yeah, so that's a pretty simple example of just a route. And then you can also specify which methods you want with the route as well. So here we just had it set to match the like root directory, but in this case we have it set to match login if the request is a get. If it's not a get request, this code will not run. In fact, in the other case that it's a post request, I mean there are other types of like methods as well, but in the case that it's post request, it'll run this code instead. So yeah, if it's a get request, like if someone just like types it into their browser, you obviously just want to send the HTML code. So then we do that. But then in the actual HTML code, there's like a form. I can show you that there. And then when they click submit, it will post the form data to the same link. So then in that case, it'll run this code here, right? Because it matches on post. And so I guess I'll show you how to actually access the form data, right? And it's a little bit weird in Flask. You actually have to import request from Flask, and then there's something called request.form, and it's effectively a dictionary, but it contains like the form data for that request. So you can just like query that to get the form data. So in this case, I basically just check if there's a username and password in the form, and if there isn't, that means like maybe someone sent like a weird request or something. I don't know. Either case, we just abort the request. I guess yeah, this abort command here basically like returns a like a really it's like a black and white text like error message to the user. So in this case, with an abort 400 code, it would give the user a bad request error. So yeah, it just saves you some time, so you don't have to write that yourself. Okay, so now that we've checked that the request is valid, we pull the username from the form data. If the username is in our database, we check to see if the password matches. If it does match, then it's a successful login and we don't do anything. At least like don't do anything else. If the password doesn't match, then we want to redirect back to the login page. It was a yeah, we just don't do anything else. And then if it's not in the user data, then we want to register the user. So then we just update the database um, with the password. Yep, cool. And then at this point, the only code, like the only time that this code can be reached is if either the password is right or they registered right. Because if the password was wrong, then this function returns and this code never runs. So at this point, the user is like legitimate. So what we do is we set in their like session, we set their username to be whatever they set it to be, right? So I said I would introduce sessions now, so it's probably a good time. So a session is basically it's like cookies. Some of you may have heard about cookies because they like appear in the news every now and then because of like trackers and whatnot. But they can't be modified by the client. So you can use it to store information about it server side, and in this case we use it to like maintain their username across like different um, like if they access like a different page, we can still know what their username is. I'll show you that later on, but yeah, it's useful for that purpose. um, yeah, and then after that we just redirect them back to the home page, and that's the page that we like after you log in you saw the page that was like welcome back biscuit. So that's this page here. So this code gets run after we redirect them to it. Oh, I guess I actually didn't explain what these functions do. So the URL for function, you basically specify the name of like one of your route methods. So in this case, I have a route on home and the method is called render homepage. So the URL for function will return a link to that. And the redirect function basically generates a web page that will redirect the user to that link. So basically this function, like this code here, when we return it, we'll send the user to this link here. And then once they're here, we check to see if the user is logged in. If they're logged in, so yeah, if their username is in their user session, then we render the home template and we substitute in their username for username. So I'll show you what that means in a second, actually. If we pull up this HTML file here, you can see this weird like two curly braces and then the username. This is Jinja code, and you can actually substitute in. It's like a variable basically. You can like substitute in stuff in place of that. So then it provides like a really easy way for us to substitute in their username into that page and make it dynamic. And then otherwise, yeah, if they're not logged in, then we just do the abort thingy where we send them an error message. And there's also the logout button. The logout button is pretty intuitive. You just so there's this command called pop that you can call on the session, and basically it will pop the username key if it's in there, and if it's not, it'll just do nothing. And then we redirect back to the handle base function, which is just the root directory. So, okay, and the next things are the APIs. I guess I'll see if there's any questions for now. Well, my computer's lagging a little bit. You have to pip install fast before using it. Yeah, so I used it on REPL. So if you do use REPL, it's like super convenient because it'll just like do it all with poetry. It's like the name of this like package manager. If you do it on your home computer, yeah, you'd have to use Flask. Sorry, you have to use pip to install it. Oh yeah, the pop-ups were just like, I think I have like LastPass enabled, so it did that. Okay, I don't see any questions, so I guess I'll show you guys quickly how the API works. So you can also return data like back to the user, like JSON data. So for example, there's this route here I made called API/test. And if you call a GET request to this, it will return this JSON object, which literally is just a key called message, and then the text is hello world. So I guess I can show you guys that real quick. Or I guess, yeah, here, I had a post request in there, but we can do a GET request for now. So if I send a GET request there, we see we get a JSON object back, and it's just a message and hello world. So it's super simple, as you can see. Um, you can literally just return Python dictionaries, and they automatically get converted to JSON. So you can write some really clean and concise code. And then yeah, you can also do post requests as well. And then in order to access like the post request data, you have to use the request.json object, which you import. So in this API endpoint I made, it just detects if there is a JSON like element to the request, and then if there's like a password field in the JSON, it checks if the password is 1234, and then if it is, it'll dump like all of the user data. So if we just quickly see that right here, get passwords post, and then I have that uh, the password 1234 thingy in there. Type that right. And then you can see that it dumped the dictionary that had all the user data. In this case, it's just me with the password 1234. So okay, so now that I've shown you how to make all the routes, there's one last little bit to actually make the server run, and that's this little piece of code here. And basically, it's so to actually run the server, you use app.run. And if you're using REPL, you have to type in 0.0.0.0. This is basically the IP you're running it on. And by default, it will use localhost, but which is good like if you're running it on your home computer, but it's not good if you're running it on REPL because it won't see it. So yeah, if you run it on 0.0.0.0, it'll actually pop up like this, and you can just like go to the link. And the reason we use this if name equals main thingy here is because by default, Flask actually supports multi-threading. So it'll like dynamically like spawn instances of your code if there's like a lot of requests. So this actually prevents this code from running if it's like a spawn thread, or else it'll just like recursively spawn itself and bad things happen. Cool. So I mentioned, I guess one last thing is I mentioned there was a bug here, and it has to do with what I just mentioned. Because Flask is multi-threaded, this variable here is only accessible by um, the thread that's running, right? So other threads can't see this variable at all. So basically each thread has its own like user database, which is bad. In the real world, you have like an SQL database, like a separate server that just has a uh, an SQL server that you can just query, and it doesn't matter. There's multiple threads. But most people probably won't do that because it's like time consuming to set up. So there's a way to get around that using multi-processing. You can like look it up on Stack Overflow. It's kind of a pain, but yeah. If you do like mess with this code and you want me to show you how to do that, just like PM me and I can send you the code. Seeing some questions here. Imagine if a startup stored user data like this. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a startup. Okay, if there aren't any questions, that's pretty much it. I'll post this link in the announcements channel as well, so you guys can mess around with it. If you have any questions with Flask or Express, feel free to ask Kevin or I. It's great for hackathons and stuff. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to mention.
Yeah, I think that's I guess it from us. It's already been quite a bit of time. If you guys wanted to know, next week we'll finally be explaining just the final component of web development, which is the front end, which is my specialty. Front end is basically just how we like design a website, what the website is. Um, like if you guys just want like a basic explanation just right now. Basically, your browser, every time you type in a URL, it's a GET request, and it requests from some sort of server, and the server will usually return you some sort of HTML file, and then the browser's job is to turn that HTML code and CSS and all that other information into something that looks like into a visual representation. So yeah, so HTML and just like these files are basically the way we encode just our website. But yeah, that's it from us. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Next week will be our final lesson for web development, and then after that, we might have a couple more. Only a couple more. Not too many, but yeah. Hopefully you guys enjoy that.